Hello, everyone. So, welcome to this webinar for the invitation rules on Evolia. So, to start off, we'll go into settings and we'll go under invitation and management. The first part we'll see is here the invitation and assignment priority. So, when you create your Evolia account, you'll have invitation rules that are created by default. And this is the list that is displayed right here in front of you. So you have the option to invite all employees at once without any prioritization, to invite employees by their position score. So the highest position score will be in. There is no sound. Can anybody tell me in the chat if you can hear me correctly, or if this is only Amy? Can anybody confirm that there is a sound? Okay, then I'll go on ahead. Thank you, Dean. So yes, let's go through all the invitation types. So there's all employees, which invites all employees at once, which is the default basic rule. Then there's the option to invite the employees with the highest score first. So that's the position score in their profile. To go with the employee with the least weekly assigned hours on the schedule first. To go by most experience first. So that's according to the hiring date on the schedule as well. And then after that, there is also the most senior employee first. So I mean, most experience is by the amount of hours worked on a position, and most senior first is according to the hiring date of the employee. So then after that, once you have all those standard rules, you can also create new invitation rule. So you have the option to create a standard rule, so a new standard rule, and that lets you create an invitation with only one invitation priority. So you can call it whatever you want. And then you can decide what criteria you are going to use for the prioritization of your invitation. So let's say I want the employees, the least senior employees first to be invited, then I could create an invitation rule with the least senior employee first. And then I could also mention in my invitation rule that the employee requires a certain position score to work on the shift. And I could also decide to ignore the schedule conflicts on the invitation, which means that if the employee already has a shift schedule or they're not available, they will still see the invitation if you decide to ignore the schedule conflicts. If you leave it as it is, employees who are not available or that already have a shift schedule will not get invited to the shift. And then you can decide the amount of time between each invitation. So let's say you want 5 minutes between each employee invitation. You could decide to have 5 minutes, 10, 15, so all these options here. So once you're done creating your rule, you can just click on save, and that's how you create a standard basic invitation rule. After that, you also have the option to create an advanced rule, and this is where it gets really it gets more specific, and you have more options. So this is usually what we'll go to whenever we have complicated invitation rules. So when you create a custom invitation rule, or an advanced invitation, once again you can give it a name. So this one we'll call it test 1, since the last one we called it test. And then after that, I can decide, I can have more than one invitation phase in a advanced invitation rule. So the first thing I can do is that I can prioritize, I can decide in what order I will prioritize the invitation in my first invitation phase. So let's say I want my most senior employee to get invited first in that invitation rule, I can decide to do so. I can also select the delay between each invitation. So far it's basically the same thing as a standard invitation rule. So let's say I want my employees to be invited each 5 minutes. I could select each 5 minutes. And then after that, I can select the invitation criterias. So I could select the teams of the employees that will be invited on the shift. So I can decide to invite the employees from the team only, so with the team of the shift on their profile, the exact team or fallback teams, which we'll go through later on, to invite the employees of all teams or preferred teams only. So then from there, you can manage your teams, positions, or locations that will be invited to work on that shift. So let's say you want your employees of all the different teams, but of the position of the shift to get invited, you could decide to invite the employees of all of your teams, but the employee requires to have the exact position on their profile to be invited to the shift. So that's one of the options that you have. And then after that, you could also decide the status of the employees that you'd like to invite. So let's say in your first phase, you'd only invite the part-time employees. You could decide here to invite all the part-time employees in the first invitation phase without inviting all of the full-time employees. The status of an employee can be changed on their employee profile once again. After that, there is also the option to decide the minimum amount of hours per week an employee needs to have to be invited on the shift, or the maximum amount of hours per week that an employee can have to be invited on the shift. So if we put 40 here, for example, that will mean that if an employee is invited to a shift that would put them over 40 hours, well, they would not get invited in that case if you put a max hours per week of 40 hours. So for example, an employee is already scheduled to work 33 hours on the schedule, and you create an open shift that is an 8-hour shift. Well, then that would put the employee to a 41-hour schedule if they were invited to that shift. So in that case, you can decide to put a max amount of hours per week, so employees who will cross that amount of hours with the specific created shift would not be invited to that shift. Oops, we'll start over again. I misclicked next to it. Call it test one again. Then we said here to prioritize by most senior, 5 minutes between invitation, include all teams, and a max amount of hours of 40 hours per week. After that, I can decide the minimum amount of hours per pay period or the maximum amount of hours per pay period, which is basically the same thing as per week. But if let's say your pay period is every 2 weeks and you'd like to have max amount of hours per pay period instead of per week, you could also decide to do so. After that, you have the option to ignore scheduled conflicts once again, which will ignore if the employee already has a shift or if the employee is not available to work on that day. And you can also decide to ignore availability. So scheduled conflicts, I'm sorry, in that case is only for shifts already scheduled, and availability is for the availability of the employee. And then I can decide the amount of time that I will need to wait before my second invitation phase is started. So delay before sending invitations for the second phase. So in that case, if I add a second invitation phase, I can once again go through all of that process, and I can decide once again to enter to sort my employees in that invitation phase or invite them in order of seniority. I can also decide to have a delay of 5 minutes between each invitation or decide my delay. And then after that, I can do the same thing here with the teams, the positions, locations, max hours per week, and all of that stuff. But this time for the second invitation phase, in that specific case, we will invite the part-time for the first invitation phase. And then in the second invitation phase, we'll only invite the full-time employees, which means at the end of all my invitation phase, all of the employees that can work on that shift will be invited to that shift. So once I'm done creating my invitation phases, I can then decide my assignment priority. So the assignment priority is interesting when you have the I'm sorry, I'm losing my words right now. But the assignment priority is interesting when you decide to invite all of your employees at the same time, and when you require an approval whenever there's somebody interested on the open shift. So we'll see later on, there's an option to decide whether or not when an employee is interested to work on an open shift, it requires an approval from a manager. What that means is that when an employee is interested to work on a shift, if it doesn't require an approval from a manager, the first employee to mention their interest on the shift will get said shift. However, if it requires the approval of a manager, you can decide to sort the assignment priority in the list so it's easier for the manager after that to assign the shifts manually. So in the assignment priority, I can decide my first level of priority. So in that case, I invited the employees by most senior first. So I'd like my assignment priority to be the same. So we leave it as most senior employee first. But let's say two employees have the same hiring date. Well, I would like to enter a second level of priority. So in that case, I could decide to enter, well, I would like to have the employee with the most seniority, but the least hours first in my list of assignment priority. Therefore, if two employees have the same hiring date and they're both interested to work on the shift, the one with the least hours will be displayed first in the list of employees interested for the manager to approve. And then after that, you can also create groups, the same way you can create different invitation phases in the invitation phases part. So you can create different groups of assignment priority. So usually what you would like to do is to split up your assignment priority the same way that you split up your invitation phases. So therefore, I can name my first group. So in the first group, we decided to invite, in the example, the part-time employees. So we'll call that group part-time. And then after that, I will select to display the employees of all the teams the same way I did in the invitation phase. And this group would only include the part-time employees. I can also decide if I want to display the employees that respect the max hours or not display them in that list. And after that, I can add my second group the same way. So in that case, we'll call the second group full-time. And I can decide once again the teams that I want to include in that group and the employee status, the position or the location as well. So I'm sorry, I made a mistake here. I wanted to have my full-time. So now I have my two groups split up into different parts. And then I can decide if I want to auto-assign the shift after a certain amount of time. So it says here, these parameters will only be applied if the approval required for open shift assignments parameter is activated. See permissions. So as I said earlier, there's two different options. Either whenever there's an employee interested on an open shift, that it is applied, the shift is applied automatically to the first employee that says they're interested to work on that shift, or that when employees mention their interest to work on that shift, it requires an approval from a manager. So this setting right here will only work in the second case where it requires an approval from the manager. And then with the auto assign, you can decide to assign the shift to the first person in the assignment priority that you've selected here, either after a certain amount of time after the shift, before the shift starts, or a certain amount of time after the shift publication. So let's say I want all of my shifts to be assigned automatically to the first person in the list 48 hours before the start of the shift. I could do that, or I could also enter a delay after the shift publication. So let's say I want all of my shifts to be assigned automatically to the first person in the list, let's say 7 days after the publication, then I could enter 7 days or the amount of hours that I'd like to. So let's say 168 hours. So these are the different options that you have when you create an invitation. So once you've created your rule, you can click on save, and then it adds this new invitation rule to your list of invitation rules. However, keep in mind that this is not the last part of settings that you need to do. When you go then in invitation management, you see here that you have the option to select a default invitation rule to apply to all of your shifts. So let's say I'd like to have my test one rule to be applied to all of my shifts by default. I could do that. And I could also assign an invitation mode to a specific team, position, or location. So let's say in my case, for the position 5, I want to apply a specific invitation rule that is not the default invitation rule of the account. I can decide to change the default invitation rule for all of the shifts of this position. So then I can go and say, I'd like to have all of my employees invited at once for the shifts of position 5. So you can change the invitation rules by default in here. And then I mentioned to you earlier that in the invitation rule, whenever you create an advanced invitation rule, you have the option to select the exact team or fallback teams, the exact position or fallback positions, or the exact location or fallback locations. What this does is that when you go in employee mobility, which is once again in your settings, just underneath invitation assignment, and you go under manage fallback invitations, you can decide for a specific team, position, or location to assign a backup or a fallback location, position, or location for each of those. So let's say I take position 1, and my invitation rule says that it invites all of the employees of position 1 and the fallback positions. And then I would like to say that, well, when I create a shift of position 1, I'd like all of my employees with the position 2 on their profile to be invited as well. I can click on the 3 dots next to here, click on manage, and then select position 2 as a fallback position to position 1. So in that case, when I create shifts for position 1, and the option to invite all of the employees of the specific position and fallback position is selected in the invitation rule, all of the employees of position 1 and position 2 will be invited to work on that shift. So that's where you can go and manage all of your fallback teams, positions, and locations for your invitation rules. And then if I go in the general settings and I go in the permission settings, I was talking to you about the setting that requires an approval for OpenShift assignments. This is this setting right here. So that means that if I deactivate this setting, it would not require an approval, and the first employee interested to work on a shift would get the shift every time I publish an OpenShift. So this is the setting I'm talking about. And keep in mind that when an employee creates a replacement request, so remember that you have the option to, as a manager, create an open shift, which is not assigned to anyone. But let's say an employee would like to request a replacement. It will take the invitation rule that is on the shift by default to invite all of the employees. So in that case, in the settings that I've made, it would use the test 1 invitation rule whenever an employee, except for position 5, of course, would request a replacement. It would invite the employee the same way that the test 1 invitation rule invites the employees. So then let's go into schedule and test this invitation rule that I've created. So if I go into schedule, and let's say we want to create a shift, let's go in the future. So let's say I want to create an open shift for Monday, February 24th. So I'll just go ahead in here and enter all of the details for my shift. So let's just take whatever's in there. If I scroll all the way to publish parameters, you will see here the invitation rule that is selected by default. And you will also see, you can also change the invitation rule from here, even though there's an invitation rule selected by default. So here, when I select my test one rule, obviously all the employees are going to be invited one after the other. So it shows me here which employee is going to be invited first. So let's say I decide to publish this shift. You will see here that I have Jennifer who's going to be invited, and then I can decide to preempt the next invitation. And then after that, I'll be able to see the next employee that's going to be invited afterwards. So each employee are invited one after the other in that case. Let's say I go switch my invitation rule. And instead of inviting all the employees one after the other, I'd like to invite all of my employees at once. Then in that case, I'll go select my invitation rule, and I can edit my invitation rule that I've created from here. So once you've created an invitation rule, you can edit an invitation rule. Keep in mind that this will not edit the invitations that are already sent. So in that case, the shift that I just created will not be sent more invitation. So I'll go ahead in here, and in the invitation phases, I'd still like all of my part-time employees to be invited at once, but I would not like them to be invited by most senior first. I just want all of them to be invited at the same time. So in that case, I will select the all employees, no prioritization in both my invitation phases, which means that in the first phase, all of my part-time employees of all the teams, but the specific position and location only, will be invited to the shift. And in my second phase, well, it's going to be the same thing, but with the full-time employees. So let's say in that case, we'll do the same thing here. We'll edit our invitation rule. And then you'll see that when I go back to my schedule and create another shift with the same invitation rule, we should technically see all of the employees, unless I've done something wrong here. Let me see something real quick. Oh, it's because I only have one part-time employee in the location one. So let's say I select here, let's change the status of those employees. So here I can change the status of some employee, because none of them are part-time, so none of them are going to be invited at first. And let's just change all of those employees. We'll put them all as part-times on their profile. And let's also, in our invitation rule, since we don't have a lot of employees in the position one, sorry, this is a test account, so not too familiar with all of the structure and everything, but let's go and say to include all the positions as well, and all the positions as well in here. So now what we've done is that we've added the part-time status for these three employees right here, and they're all part of the location one, which is the location on the shift. So they can all work on that shift according to the invitation rule, because I've invited all the employees of any teams and any positions. So when I go back to the schedule, when I create my invitation, you will see that all these three employees will be invited to the shift in the first place. So let's say I click on here, and then I set my invitation rule as test one. I can click on publish here, and I should technically see all three employees in here normally. The reason why I'm not seeing it is because, let me just check something real quick. So we remove this. And we remove this as well. And let's delete those two shifts. Okay. Let's see why they're not invited. Does not match the employee status. Let's say, oh, I forgot about this part. Okay, so I have qualifications on the shifts required here. I forgot about this part, so I need to go delete those. I'm so sorry about these. Yeah, this is the qualification that is complicating the things for our invitation. So now if I create a new shift, that's the part I forgot about. You will see that 9 employees will be invited in that case. The qualifications are coming conflicts with the invitation rule. So now it's all right. All my 9 employees will be invited to the shift. So when I click on publish here, you will see that I have, first of all, 3 employees invited in the first place. So I have Jennifer, I have David, I have JD. And then if I scroll down, I also see my upcoming invitation, which is my second phase of all the full-time employees. So let's say I would like to, so you remember in our invitation rule, we set it up as you have to wait an hour before the invitation is sent to all the other employees. So the second group, I could decide to preempt the next invitation by clicking on preempt next invitation here. So now you will see all of my employees will be invited at once. And then obviously once employees are interested, you can do the assignment after that. But this is the general rules of invitation rules. And then after that, once you've invited all of your employees, automatically from the invitation rule, you can also decide to invite more employees manually on the shift. So let's say none of the employees that are matching the invitation rules are interested to work on that shift. You can also decide to go and invite manually certain employees that would not necessarily match the criteria of your invitation rule. So that's basically what I want to go through. So I'll go through your list of questions here. If there's any questions in the chat. Let's see. Let's see here. No, it doesn't seem like there's, unless I'm wrong. No, all right, so it doesn't seem like any of you had any questions on your end. So I thank you all for joining today. And if you have any questions about the webinar that you just saw, don't hesitate to contact us. So there's many ways to contact us, either by our technical support or to your assigned customer success manager. So thank you all for joining and have a great day.